If you're seen at all, then the game becomes get out without being caught. Once you've been suspected, all the odds are against you.
We will measure our success not only by the battles we win, but also by the wars we end. The U.S. will take over the Gaza Strip. We'll own it. Know that China is doing very poorly right now. I just saw some reports coming out, and I don't want that to happen to China. You're gambling with World War III. I was saved by God to make America great again.
I'm Roland Oliphant, and this is Battlelines. It's Friday, the 5th of September, 2025. Now, how many of you know what it feels like to be unmasked as a spy? Or how you would escape a hostile surveillance team? Or even what living undercover would do to your love life? The closest most of us will ever come to living out those questions are the novels of John le Carré, or perhaps films about James Bond. But Andrew and Jihi Bustamante lived them for real. They served for 7 years in the CIA, where they met, fell in love, married, and then went on covert operations together. Their first book, Shadow Cell, is out next month. It's partly an insider account of the new spy war, specifically about their involvement in the real-life hunt for a highly placed foreign mole inside the CIA in the early 2010s. But it also covers their own relationship, workplace affairs in the covert world, and the very peculiar office politics of spy agencies. A few weeks ago, I got to sit down with Jihi and Andrew. I began by asking them to introduce themselves and describe how they met.
My name is Andrew Bustamante. I am a former CIA intelligence officer and the owner and operator of Everyday Spy. I now teach people how to use spy skills in everyday life because I believe that spy skills are a critical skill set for the future that we have ahead of us.
Thank you. And Jihi?
My name is Jihi Bustamante. I am Andrew's wife and support in all things Everyday Spy. I'm also co-owner of Everyday Spy, and I am a former targeter for the Central Intelligence Agency. And I'm excited to, be a part of Everyday Spy and be a part of Shadow Cell.
It's great to have you two on Battlelines. There's so much to get into. The subtitle is an insider account of the new spy war. But the interesting thing is that it's also an insider account of love inside the CIA. And we're even kind of vying over whether we call this episode The Spy Who Loved Me or The Real Mr. and Mrs. Smith. I've read the book. I know the story. So could you just tell us how you two met? I think it's a really interesting kind of introduction to this. Tell us about how you met, first time you set eyes on each other.
The truth is that we have the same experience here, but we have such different stories.
Because I have a better memory.
But I'll be very brief. What I remember of the first time that we met, I met Jihi when I was first entering on duty with CIA. We did all of our briefings, all of the standard, human resource briefings, just like the average corporate person has to learn about their insurance policy and sick days and how to request leave. You do the same thing on the first few days of CIA. And as I walked into that auditorium, there was a very pretty girl sitting by the exit, like in a chair that she had moved right to the exit door. And when I saw that girl, I was immediately attracted to her, but I assumed she was probably one of the instructors because what student would sit by the exit door? And that was actually Jihi. That was the first time I met Jihi. And it wasn't for a few weeks after that before I ever discovered that she was actually a student and had the chance to ask her on a date.
So my story is fairly similar, except Andy leaves out all the work I put into actually meeting him because that first day, we met in the sense that, we locked eyes and I saw him at the front of the room sitting in between two girls and I heard him laugh and I thought, I have to meet that guy. And so I spent the next 3 weeks trying to get a seat next to him, which was almost impossible because he was always sitting in between two girls. And I thought, I'm going to do this if it kills me. And I was sick at the time. I had undiagnosed general anxiety disorder. So all I knew was that I was throwing up a lot. So, I was having a really tough go of it, which is why I was always sitting by the exit door. And so finally, when Andy was actually the one who helped diagnose me, because when I finally found a seat behind him and inserted myself into the conversation he was having with another girl, he asked me out fairly quickly, which I was very excited about. And then right before the date, literally, he was calling me to ask my address and I canceled. And I was like, I can't do this. And he's like, are you sure you don't want just some coffee? And I was like, no, I'm just not feeling well. And I hung up and I went to the bathroom and threw up. And that's when I was diagnosed with the anxiety disorder, because I was like, oh my gosh, I'm anxious. Like, this boy makes me anxious, which I'm so happy that I'm diagnosed, but I'm also so sad because I can never see him again. And then we spent the next 2 months avoiding each other.
You know, what's funny is in many ways, the story that we share differently is such a good juxtaposition of how different we are as people. Jihi's sitting by the back exit. I'm sitting in the front row. Jihi's sitting by herself with nobody around. I am always putting effort, or I was always putting effort to try to sit between two girls. It's very funny to reflect on these things when you write your own memoir, when you write your own story.
You're both like in kind of early stages of CIA training, right, at this stage?
Yes.
So I'm imagining you're all kind of 20-somethings and like everyone's doing what you did, Andrew, and kind of walking the auditorium and scanning for pretty potential partners to ask out, right? So it sounds almost... So how old were you guys, roughly? Just put us in...
We were 27.
Yeah, both of us were 27.
Just turned.
It's funny that you mentioned that, Roland, because the running joke at CIA is that it's America's most expensive dating service.
Was that kind of the typical age group for the intake?
Yes and no. I would say it was kind of a 60-40 split between under 30 and over 30, with 60% of people being under 30. CIA tends to recruit quite young, sometimes as young as 24 or 25, depending on the life experience and education. But there's a healthy contingent of officers that are well into their 30s, 33, 35, because depending on the mission set and the skill set, sometimes you need somebody who has seasoning in their background.
But coming back to your point about this dating service, this is the thing I've slowly been leading up to, and which I find fascinating. I mean, I've got the quote from the book written out here. In fact, I'll level with you. It's my editor who wrote out the quote because she really wants to hear more about this. It's unlike other workplaces and especially government agencies, CIA actively encourages dating within the organization. That way they figure both parties know what they can and can't talk about. There's less chance of a leak. And the worst thing you can do, first of all, the second worst thing is fall in love with a foreigner. The worst thing is fall in love with an American who doesn't work for the CIA, because when you get married, you then have to make a decision about telling them or not. And then you tell the story of a friend who was on his honeymoon, reveals that actually he's a CIA agent and they're going to have to move to the Middle East and they're divorced within 2 years, which sounds pretty traumatic. Is that particularly an American CIA thing, or do you think it's practiced in spy agencies across the world? And how common are, I guess, spy couples like you guys? Is almost everybody coupled up there?
I would actually argue that it's very common to see spy couples. They may not be long-term couples. Mm-hmm. They may not be lifelong couples, but people couple up very often. And it's partly practicality, but it's also partly because CIA has done all the hard work of bringing together people who already have matching interests. Everybody who sits in the room with you is risk tolerant. Everybody who sits in the room with you is well-educated, very intelligent, life experienced. Nobody is really shallow, but they're all ego-driven. They're all mission-driven. They're all trying to change the world. Like, when you put a group of people together like that, you'd be silly if you didn't think sparks were going to fly. I will also say that in our work with foreign intelligence services, I've seen that being fairly common there as well. What we see at CIA is not unique to CIA.
Yeah, and I think it's just such a unique field that dating within helps you understand each other better, because it's really difficult when you're learning secret skills and you're working with secret material. I think it's really difficult to confide in a spouse or a partner that doesn't understand, that doesn't understand the culture of the CIA, that doesn't understand what it really takes to engage in intelligence gathering. So I think, dating within the agency itself, dating another intelligence officer really makes so much sense just for moral support.
An old friend of mine, Sean Walker, a fellow former Russia correspondent, has recently published a book about the Russian illegals program, which I suppose, as you guys know, is a very long-term deep cover people sent over to kind of basically assume a completely different identity for years. And they found, after a while, they came up with a policy of, we are only sending couples because people were having breakdowns because of the psychological stress of basically living a lie alone in a foreign country for so long. That's quite an extreme program. I mean, it doesn't sound like you guys had to live fake identities for decades at a time or anything like that. But Is that a similar kind of motivation for the CIA, kind of encouraging people to work together?
Yeah, I think CIA understands in a very carnal way that high ambition people are going to be high ambition in multiple parts of their life. They're going to want to find a high ambition partner. They're going to want to get laid on the weekends. They're going to want to blow off stress. They're going to want to do all the crazy stuff that anybody wants to do, especially when you're successful and in your late 20s or early 30s. I mean, anybody can put themselves in in the shoes of a 28-year-old recently recruited CIA officer. You're on top of the world. The last thing you're going to do is hide in some underground apartment and never go out. My wife actually tried. That was her whole life goal in many ways, was to just hide away from society and go nowhere except to work and back to her underground apartment. And even still, you went salsa dancing, and even still you had social outlets. Like you were eager to achieve as much in your social life as you were in your professional life.
The obvious question, of course, is the reason that other organizations kind of discourage this kind of thing for pretty good reasons, right? And you mentioned some of them in your book. There's the nepotism issue. If like one person takes a more senior position, there's kind of what happens if you break up and then you start dating someone else in the organization and you have like a bunch of simmering resentments and so on. That must actually be an issue. That all those issues don't go away, right? Even if the CIA's decided it's better to have it in-house than not. How does the organization deal with that?
We have a joke at CIA that the only thing CIA encourages more than dating is divorce. They will help you. They will bend over backwards. They will do everything in their power to expedite and help officiate your divorce because they want you married to the job. So they have no problem with people who date, and they have no problem with people who divorce whoever they're married to. It's when you try to go from dating to being married, that's when they start trying to throw wrenches in the system, because you're essentially introducing new vulnerabilities and new loyalty that might even be above your loyalty to the organization.
Nepotism is a real issue. So married couples within the CIA, if they are in the same career track, which luckily Andy and I were not, but a lot of case officers marry each other. And then there's the problem of being assigned together, which is difficult. And if couples are separated, that's a vulnerability. And then there's the issue of as they rise through the ranks, somebody might actually end up being in a position where they are over the other spouse, and that's not allowed. So we were at a number of places where the spouses would be in the same country, but one would actually be a regional officer under a completely different division. So they were co-located, but working completely different career tracks, which career-wise isn't ideal. So if one partner ends up getting, passed over for promotions because they have to constantly trail the other partner, that becomes a problem.
We did not even attempt to try to have a 10, 12, 20, 25-year career at CIA because we could see the writing on the wall. Even after we came back from our shadow cell operation and they started splitting us in two different directions to expand on the success that we already had, we could see that not only were we being divided, but CIA had no interest at all in our ambitions or hopes for the family we were trying to build.
And oftentimes, as a couple progresses and has children, one of the spouses ends up leaving anyways to stay home. And we saw that on the horizon. We had our first, and then we were talking about having a second, and then suddenly we were like, I think one of us will have to leave. And I liked my career. Yeah. So, we did end up leaving in the end, but it would have been very difficult for me if I had to stay home and I saw Andy keep working.
It sounds like they kind of put a spanner in the works with you. Do you feel forced out in a way? Is there a degree of anger there?
When I chose to leave CIA, and I was the one that chose to leave first, I was the one that presented the idea to Jihi, there was a lot of anger in the decision. And it was because of the loyalty topic. It wasn't necessarily that CIA as an organization had an issue with me potentially being loyal to my spouse first. It was because even at individual levels, within different groups, and when I say a group is inside CIA, a group is about 300 officers. And then within each group, there are different offices, and there are even different desks. And a desk might have 3 or 5 people assigned to it. So at every level of the organization, there's a culture of being loyal to the people in the organization that you're with. So you're more loyal to the desk than you are to the group. You're more loyal to the group than you are to the division. You're more loyal to the division than you are to the agency. And that's just an expectation. That was what always rubbed me the wrong way, because I joined an organization that was supposed to be loyal to the American people. That's what I thought I was signing up for. But then when I had to get indoctrinated into the culture, I realized it's still a bureaucracy. It's still like any other corporation. And the sales team has to be better than the customer support team. And there's all this internal competition and internal strife, even though you're rotating from office to office. What would you say?
So I didn't have the same problem Andy had.
That's true.
I didn't mind it at all. And for me, you know, I agree that loyalty is huge at the CIA, but I have my own internal loyalty to my family. And that was, you know, when I was hired, one of the first interview questions I was asked by the psychologist, actually, that interviewed me was, you know, you're a Buddhist and a social worker, because I was a social worker at the time. How do you reconcile that with some of the things that the CIA does? What if they ask you to do something that goes against what you believe in? And I very firmly believed that, you know, I would step away. But in the meantime, I didn't mind the bureaucracy. Like, you know, I could draw the line between loyalty to my family and doing a good enough job. So, you know, I figured if I did a good job and I kept my head down, no problems.
I mean, not to play the couples counselor. I feel a bit like that here, to be honest. But it does sound like different. I mean, you write in the book, Andy, about your background and this stepfather you could never please, and then this career in the Air Force where you end up kind of, maybe you're just someone who just doesn't like bureaucracies and big organizations in a way. That's yes. Just throwing that out there.
I think, unfortunately, my time at CIA was like a 10-year counseling session, but it was very productive, because I landed on very similar to you, the same outcome, that it's just big bureaucracies are not my favorite. So how do I go live on an island somewhere with no boss?
I think that's a really interesting way to kind of set up what I want to talk about next, which is the content of the book, the mission you describe in that book, which in turn I think is going to be a nice way into talking about the state of the global espionage world at the moment and the threats faced. So you've met, you've become a couple, somehow you end up on the mission that the book is about, Shadow Cell. Tell us about how that mission came about and how you end up being assigned together as a husband and wife team.
So Jihi and I got married while we were still kind of going through what I would call the on-the-job training portion of CIA. They teach you the core skills, but then you go through many years of experience in different offices, building up your background and your field expertise. So through smaller operations, you build up experience in the field that then kind of prepares you for larger and longer operations. So we were in two different tracks, going through two different career paths, and we were dating when we could and getting quite serious about getting engaged, getting married. And then right about the same time that we were finalizing our wedding plans, we both got called into an office that was completely outside of the realm of where we worked. We got called into an office that in the book we call it Falcon House. The true office of Falcon House is still to this day classified according to CIA. But we get called into Falcon House, where we're presented with an opportunity to be part of a new operation to build a new network of sources in a very hostile country. And neither of us had backgrounds, skills, language skills, or any kind of expertise that would suggest we would be good for the fit. Nothing like that. What we came to find out is that they called upon us specifically because we had none of the connections and none of the background before.
Right. And so it was kind of a surprise because we were called in separately, and I had actually been offered an assignment someplace else that I was very excited about going to. And so when my immediate supervisor said they want to talk to you, I thought, oh no, my assignment's going to go down the tubes. But they presented me with this new opportunity. I didn't know that Andy had been presented yet. It was so new. I was excited, but also, a little nervous about whether to accept it or not until I talked to Andy. And then we thought, when else would we ever get this opportunity of a lifetime to work this target that's so important to the United States?
you were married already then?
We were engaged, and we had our wedding date on the calendar. We had our wedding plans already in motion. We already had submitted our leave request for our honeymoon. So CIA knew it was coming.
I'm assuming they picked you because you were the best people for the job. It was a deliberate decision to send a couple on this.
I want to push back. I don't believe they thought we were the best couple for the job. I think they knew that Jihi would be a great fit and that I was an acceptable risk. But I also don't believe for a second we were the only two people given this assignment. I believe that there were probably 3 or 5 other teams or possibly individuals who were given a very similar assignment, and none of it was coordinated within the 5 teams because they wanted to keep everything compartmentalized.
And there's a specific reason why they call on you two. There's a mole in the CIA.
Correct. Yeah, they call upon us because there's a mole inside CIA, and I think because they know that we are young enough and early enough in our career that we're disposable. Mm-hmm. We're not critical intelligence resources, at least not at this time. Mm-hmm. And they know that they're trying to find a mole, and a mole is a critical intelligence vulnerability.
Mm-hmm. And the mole wasn't just in the generalized CIA, the mole was in Falcon House. And because we were not a part of Falcon House, they thought that we would be protected because the mole wouldn't know who we were. And so we would be fresh eyes, fresh people.
So you're sent off. The mission, as I understand, is you're not the mole hunters. You're sent off to go and set up a new network and so on. You seize on the strategic genius of none other than Osama bin Laden in order to go about your job. And there's a wonderful line in there. Part of me, to be honest, Andrew, wonders if it's true because it's just too good to be true. You, towards the end of the book, you say, you summon a conference of other CIA professionals and say, look, this is what we're doing. We're doing intelligence and we're doing terrorism to get their attention, which is I hasten to add at this point, as far as you say in the book, you weren't literally doing terrorism. But tell us about this, about what happened.
I think that part of CIA's strategic intelligence, for lack of a better word, their strategic superiority is in the fact that they assigned Jihi to this task, because Jihi by herself would have probably performed differently in this role than she did when I was involved. By having the two of us go into Shadow Cell to build this network in this hostile country, kind of against the odds, it gave her somebody else to protect. And I think that unlocked a certain level of creativity in her that she otherwise would not have had when she was going through her normal bureaucratic, like, run-of-the-mill day. And this idea to essentially replicate terrorist modus operandi, what is commonly called MO, to replicate terrorist MO and use it to benefit our operations is 100% Jihi's idea.
When targeters work at headquarters, at least at that time, we worked pretty much in silos. I worked in an office with a bunch of cubicles, and we were all targeters. And if I wanted to talk to a case officer or an analyst, I had to walk to a different floor or down the hall. I had to go someplace else to talk to them. We didn't sit together. So here I am in the location, that we call Wolf in the book, because the actual location is also classified by CIA. So here I am in this new location, Wolf, and I have Andy in the same office. I have James in the same office. And really having those two and being able to sit in an office with them and to brainstorm, to just kind of get a feel for what is it really like for a case officer to real-time troubleshoot issues with cases, and to get the perspective of a staff operations officer and the perspective of a case officer. That really broadened, my knowledge base, and really did help me be creative because I could bounce ideas off of these two, like, really intelligent and experienced guys. Working in the field, everything moves at a much quicker pace. And so because I had suddenly gotten used to moving at this much quicker pace, it was so much easier to not just fall back on my training, but to start thinking of new ideas. And the terrorist cells worked so well. The war on terror was really difficult for the United States because of how the terrorists worked. And so I thought, well, we can replicate that and we can use that against our enemy.
Just at this point, guys, can you just very, very quickly kind of one-word dictionary definition so we don't get too lost? I think it would benefit listeners to understand what case officer means, what targeter means.
So a case officer is what you see in most movies. It's the person who goes out into the field and tries to steal secrets from foreign sources. A staff operations officer is essentially the person who mirrors the case officer back in Langley, who makes sure that they have everything they need, all the money, all the documentation, all the travel plans. It's almost like a if you could, a personal assistant to the case officer. And then a targeter is a person who actually builds the cases, the profiles, the dossiers, who does the deep research into each individual target. Those three people together become a very powerful team. And prior to the shadow cell, CIA was never putting those three people in the same room to act as a team.
After the break, we've all had bad days at the office. But how do you get on with your co-workers when everybody in the office is a trained liar?
You both talk about these experiences during the War on Terror, kind of fruitlessly banging your head on the wall of these impenetrable terrorists, and you kind of know you've got some guy who's got some connection, but it's resource intensive, it's going to take weeks of surveillance, but you're not getting anywhere. You describe this really, really frustrating kind of, they're in there somewhere, but I don't know how to open the box almost. You come up with this idea of replicating this on this assignment in your efforts to infiltrate the country you're calling Falcon. Tell us how that looked.
So the way that the cells worked in the terrorist organizations is they had all of the leadership. So if you were looking at a chart, they'd have all the leadership, and then they'd have the foot soldiers below them. But then they usually had, and it'd go down to less important people as you went down the chart. But they usually had a node or multiple nodes. And that node was the one person of contact. So it made it really difficult to actually locate, because if you're looking at various data sources that we were able to collect at the time on terrorists, you might have a bunch of data, but it just looks like noise. The CIA over time, over the War on Terror, was able to create this software that could identify patterns, which could point you to a node. And if we could identify that one node, then we could start to unravel the entire network. But for us, we thought that if we created our own cell that had one node, then even if the mole could identify that one node, then that meant that everybody else was still safe, because all they would ever see is communication back and forth to headquarters, or communication, travel or anything else from that one person. But they wouldn't understand how many people were actually in the cell. They wouldn't know who else was in the cell. It would be really difficult to uncover anything else besides that one person.
I was puzzling over this when I read the book. Does that mean that Langley didn't know what you were doing, basically? Because you talk about how Andrew became just the Bin Laden's courier, if you like. You're the only person linking the cell you set up with Langley. Did they not know what you were doing?
To a certain extent, they were deferring their authority to Wolf itself. So Wolf leadership in the field right beside us.
The CIA station in this third country capital city. Right.
Correct, sir. So Wolf station and the leadership there were intimately aware of everything we were doing. And then they would communicate the intelligence, which is the important part of the operations. They would report the intelligence back to Langley, but they would not report the operational details, the who, what, where, when, and how we actually collected the intelligence that was being shared. That was all done in concert in order to force the mole back in Falcon House to try to start probing, to try to start taking active efforts to try to identify where this intel was coming from. Because Falcon House knew that if they cut off the information flow, the mole would have to step outside of his lane in order to try to find more information. And that was the tripwire they were trying to set for him. So our job was to do the operation, communicate to Wolf leadership. Wolf leadership's job was to sanitize all the information and send it back to Falcon House.
I just want to fast forward to this bit where it all begins to fall apart. You give us a bit of a clue. You put a date on this. You talk about kind of 2011. And Andrew, you have to, for whatever reason, you go into Falcon, and you've done it several times. And you think you're safe because you're not actually operating as a case officer. You're not actually meeting sources. It's purely kind of walking around doing recon and stuff. You should be clean. And you notice that actually, hold on a second, I'm being followed. The surveillance has been stepped up. It sounded pretty scary. I mean, when I'm reading it, I can kind of almost feel the kind of the adrenaline kind of that you must have felt coursing through. And to be honest, it's not that dissimilar to journalism, in that I've definitely been reporting in countries where I can remember one particular very long taxi ride back to an airport, kind of looking out the window, waiting for, And literally, as you describe, you talk about kind of not quite sure you're out until the plane has entered another country's airspace. Tell us about how it went wrong. And also, I'm really interested in whether you ever worked out how it had gone wrong. How had you ended up kind of almost being compromised?
I guess the crux of it is, like you said, when I identified in Falcon that I was under not just surveillance, but under very sophisticated surveillance. Because like you were saying, Roland, it's not uncommon for businessmen, for journalists, for foreign researchers to be put under some kind of surveillance. And usually it's fairly obvious. You can see the person who's following you down the street. You can see the person who's watching you over the same, cup of coffee in the lobby while you're having a conversation with somebody. It's not necessarily unfamiliar to some people. But when you can identify sophisticated surveillance, that's a rarer skill. That's something CIA teaches us so that we can understand when there's a full team of people following us. And when I identified that there was a full team of people following me, the feeling is very much like when you're caught in a lie. And we've all been there. We've all had that moment where you realize that someone just caught you in a lie, and the blood kind of rushes to your head and you can feel your stomach sink and you kind of float there for a few seconds, kind of in disbelief that you've been caught red-handed. That is exactly what it felt like, but amplified, tenfold, 100-fold, because I couldn't just sit there and stop in my tracks and kind of gape into space shocked. I had to keep going because I couldn't show the surveillance team that I realized I was under surveillance. One of the things that I'm really proud of in our book specifically is that we take a lot of the stereotypical spy fiction assumptions and we shatter them against reality. And one of those spy fiction falsehoods that we shatter is this idea that when you're under surveillance, you run and you hide and you duck behind corners and you try to change your outfit and you try this idea of losing your tail. None of that is real. In real life, real professionals have a real strategy that we use in order to defeat surveillance that we detect. The whole reason you detect surveillance at all is so that you can manipulate and defeat them from that point forward. And I've never seen it in a movie. I've never seen it in a book. And I was very excited to explain that process to the people who read this book, read Shadow Cell with us, because it was that process of manipulating and trying to defeat surveillance that allowed me to get out of Falcon safely instead of ending up detained by some black van or possibly pulled off of my airplane.
You do manage to escape. You get back. You're chatting with a case officer in your cell who, I think you say he's the only one who actually has a background working on Falcon. And he says, "Oh my God, you got lucky." And you realize that you came really close because he lays out what he knows about how they work. The cell failed somehow. They knew who you were. Did you ever learn why? Is it the mole? Do you know what went wrong?
We don't. We never were able to confirm. We had our suspicions, but we were never able to confirm exactly what happened.
Our suspicion is that the mole was able to identify my name, and that the mole then communicated that name.
Your cover name or your real name? My
operating alias.
Right. Okay.
My operating alias was confirmed or was shared to the Falcon Intelligence. And then Falcon Intelligence took that operating alias and then started to assign a surveillance squad to watch that operating alias to confirm whether or not the intelligence they were receiving was factual. That's the first step in a very bad series of events. In real espionage, you don't even want to be identified as suspicious, period. There is no second day of the operation once you've been identified as suspicious, because you're playing a game where the hostile intelligence service can always increase their resources and increase their technology, their manpower, their access to you. They have every opportunity because they have home field advantage, and you are just one person in their backyard. So the whole game of espionage is get in and get out without being seen. If you're seen at all, then the game becomes get out without being caught, because there is no reason to try to push it further. Once you've been suspected, all the odds are against you.
Falcon. If I was to be an unkind reviewer of your book, I would say the code names you've picked for them make it sound slightly ridiculous.
we're going to codename Falcon, but then we have this guy called Kingpin, and then we have to get back to Wolf. Do you really pick codenames like that in the CIA? You don't use like Pumpkin or something more innocuous?
What you're running into here, Roland, is the bureaucratic process of being former CIA officers trying to write your operational history. CIA fought with us for 3 years before finally acquiescing to letting us publish this book. We had to threaten CIA with a First Amendment lawsuit before they finally decided to respect our right to publish a book that does not contain classified information. One of the stipulations that they put on us is that we could not use real code names. So the code names that we use at CIA are very much like what you're describing. Innocuous names that sometimes don't even make sense, right? Not names of birds of prey, because that's a category of names. So now essentially in intelligence, if you were to categorize all of your targets with a single, birds of prey or North American predators or, insects of the Amazon, that category would actually give some insight into how all those cases are related. CIA kind of forced us to name these locations in a way that they accepted, even though we knew it wasn't real.
Because that's the point where it does begin to sound like a Tom Cruise movie,
Yeah, for sure.
That's curious. And this is the follow-up to that question, which is awkward, which is that the CIA have read the copy of the book, right? And they eventually okayed it, right? And it's all meant to be redacted. I began reading the book. Well, I read it in a day. I began yesterday morning. Yesterday evening, I was pretty sure I knew where Falcon was. In fact, I know for a fact where Falcon is. I've double-checked everything. It's not that difficult to work it out. Is that deliberate? Or am I a genius?
So I think that what you're seeing there is that we wrote the book to be as transparent as possible. CIA did everything in their power to try to obfuscate our transparency. But at the end of the day, an intelligent, well-reasoned, informed person is going to be able to get very, very close to understanding the true story behind our obfuscated memoir. This is just part of the spy game. And that's why we call it a game, because CIA had to approve in order for us not to be held criminally liable for writing the book. But we had a mission to share a story transparently. That was our purpose in writing the book. It's not even a book about us. If anything, I think we kind of look silly and foolish in most of the book. It's really about the men and women who do an incredible job at CIA that nobody gets to hear about. And at the end of the day, CIA couldn't legally stand in the way of publication. The answer is you probably are quite close, Roland. I would guess most intelligent people can get quite close to it, but we are forbidden by law from being able to confirm or deny whatever conclusion you reach.
It's quite easy to corroborate with reporting in the public domain that talks about a mole in a hostile country, about the quite brutal winding up of a CIA network in that country around that time, where people died. The book is about the infiltration of the CIA by a mole. Britain still lives in the shadow of, the Cambridge Five and so on and so forth. I'm wondering whether you think that is an increasing problem for the CIA or for Western intelligence agencies generally. You're talking about something that happened around 2010, 2011, 15 years on. Are we more or less vulnerable, our intelligence agencies, to infiltration by the hostile states we're facing?
I mean, I think when it comes to moles, I wouldn't say it's an increasing problem. I would say it's a consistent problem. There will always be moles. There will always be people who are willing to trade information for something that they need, right? I mean, that is the business of espionage. I do feel that the reliance on technology does make us more vulnerable than we used to be. Technology is never fully secure, ever.
The larger challenge is that the average citizen, whether you're British or American, is that you're blind to how consistent this problem is. Every level of government is a ripe target for penetration by a foreign intelligence service. Your tax revenue service, your police service, your intelligence service, your education service, your labor service, all of these services that run a country are always constantly being targeted by foreign intelligence, just like CIA is actively targeting any of those services in a foreign country. So to believe that you're somehow safe from a mole is just blind. It's blind, and it shows just a lack of awareness that you only get when you become a trained intelligence officer. The fact that our mole reached what is essentially the pinnacle in many ways, penetrating a secret house inside a secret organization, inside of an intelligence service, that's how far the Falcon mole reached before CIA took action. Generally speaking, most moles, even if they're identified, they're allowed to continue to operate. They're allowed to continue to operate, especially in the West, because we have to build a legal case before we can arrest them, try them, and put them in prison. At any given time, moles operating all throughout your government and our government just to allow law enforcement to build a case.
Andrew, you in particular you've made a career as a kind of public personality. You're a YouTuber, you're a podcaster, you run Everyday Spy, where you purport to be basically selling CIA secrets to everyday people and so on. At the end of your book, you talk about you're about to leave the CIA and you're wondering what to do, and you go and see some guy who you trust in the counterintelligence department, and you think you've had a nice friendly conversation, and then he emails the entire agencies and says, don't trust the Bustamantes, don't speak to them, they're a threat to the agency. The kind of gotcha question that came to my mind is that, do you think he sent that email because he thought you were going to do something like this?
That's a good question. So what we didn't put in the book, or what the editor didn't want to have in the book, I'm not sure which way it was, is that that particular person who basically sent a burn notice on us before we had ever left was actually one of Jihi's close friends. And I, to this day, don't really understand what he was thinking or why he would do that. It was really Jihi's trust that he betrayed because she was the one who talked to him. I don't understand why he did that. I don't know what he thought we were going to do, but I will say that our rise in the public eye, while not fully accidental, has been very fortuitous. It's not that we did anything right to be successful. It's more that we just share the truth about what happens in intelligence. And apparently the truth is so unknown that it went viral multiple times, and people start listening to the truth, and the truth makes sense in a world that sometimes doesn't make sense. But to get back to your original question, I really don't know why he would have sent that note on us.
I don't know why either. And the thing I thought was the funniest was another friend told us that had happened. When you talk to your parents and you ask them a question and they give you an answer, and then later on you find out that wasn't, like, my parents let me spend the night at a friend's house one time, and then in the middle of the night they called me home, and they never told me why they called me home, but I was suddenly grounded for a week. So that's how I felt in that moment, where I was like, if he had just said, don't publish your resume, if he had just said, don't be detailed or don't do this, I would have followed his instruction. I was asking him for an honest answer. But, Andy and I talk about all the time that when you work at the CIA, you're a trained manipulator, right? The skills that the CIA gives you can be used to manipulate, or they can be used to motivate. The things that Andy teaches in Everyday Spy are all using all the skills for positive, right? How to motivate, how to get a raise or get the job that you want, or, communicate better with your children. But on the other hand, we are used to having friends in the CIA or having acquaintances in the CIA where they actively manipulate you. I was surprised, but in the end, it is something you deal with your coworkers in the CIA, where you, in the back of your mind, you question a little bit, what are their motives when they tell me this?
It's part of the culture there that makes it a challenging culture. Everybody is so smart and so skilled that you never really know if they're telling you the truth or if they're twisting the truth.
Oh, you're saying you're not even sure if that email was sent, but the person who told you it was might have just told you that for some reason?
I think the other way around. We've heard enough corroborating evidence. For sure, the email was sent. Even to this day, we still get emails from people at CIA. We get reminders that CIA is watching. We get emails and messages on social media where some people are cheering us on, complimenting us, telling us we're doing a good job of raising the true work of CIA. We also get messages from people telling us that we're sellouts and we were never nominated to be the spokesperson for CIA, and the list goes on and on of the things that people don't like. We may all be trained manipulators, but that doesn't mean that we're all well-trained manipulators, right? Jihi's friend apparently thought he was manipulating well, but in fact, he just triggered a bunch of alarm bells. For the people who were truly loyal to us.
Is he still a friend?
All of our contacts at CIA, we terminated immediately upon leaving CIA. If they're undercover, we cannot communicate with them, and we do not communicate with them. And that's ambivalent of whether or not we like them or not. It's something we must do to keep their cover protected.
It sounds like it could really, really twist you and leave you in quite a bad place living like that. Is that fair?
What you're hitting on the surface of is, and I appreciate very much because most people don't take the time to consider it, it's not an easy life being former CIA. It's especially not an easy life being publicly known to be former CIA. Because you have all the people out there who distrust CIA and distrust the American government, and they're all very verbal in their criticism. And then you have all the people who blindly are loyal and believe in CIA. And they're oftentimes just as scary as the people who blindly hate CIA. And so those are the people that send you emails and pull you over at the airport and tap you on the shoulder in the grocery store. And it's just a very challenging existence currently. And that's what we're trying to navigate through personally right now as we try to raise our 2 children in this world where we're publicly known, where we're published authors, where we're viral internet people and faces. And everybody has such a strong, vehement opinion about our background rather than a strong, vehement opinion about what we're doing now.
Can I push you for one serious question, one frivolous question, please?
Please.
And the serious one is, if I had pretty confidently worked out where Falcon is and what you were working on by last night, presumably Falcon and their agents will read this book and they'll know and so on. I mean, do you worry about your own security or the security of the other people who are on that operation with you about that kind of thing?
If I was compromised by the mole, Falcon already knows who I am. Falcon has known who I am since the day that I traveled into Falcon. So they've just been watching me since then. And they're just one of several countries that we already know have been following us. And that doesn't worry me. The fact that when the book hits bookshelves and Falcon people do or do not gain access to it, I think my concern is more of whether or not we have done a good enough job in protecting the cases and the officers who went into the book. There has been so much effort to protect sources, methods, and personalities so that nobody can be compromised. Nobody can be reverse engineered. Falcon is not going to put any effort into trying to figure me out. They already know me. They already know Jihi. They're going to put their efforts into trying to figure out who the other characters in the story are. Both the penetrations that we developed in Falcon and the case officers who were working in Falcon.
This was the biggest point of contention with the CIA review board. And in the end, I mean, we were working hand in hand with them in the end. And they ran the book through multiple people inside the agency saying, please read this book and tell me what country it is. And they got to a point where they were comfortable enough that they weren't getting the same answer from the people inside the agency. So even inside the agency, one person might say one country, one person might say another country. And they thought, okay, sources and methods and people are protected.
You do talk about like particular personalities who you're targeting and trying to recruit. You know, you talk about this person who's your big white whale and you think he's a big Falcon intelligence officer and you're trying to figure out different ways to get close to him and so on. And you talk about a young woman and you talk about someone codenamed Kingpin. So I find your code names very funny. Could those guys be identified? Could those guys' lives be put at risk?
Part of it is because you believe we're talking about a young woman and you
that's
believe
what you wrote.
That's what we wrote. Exactly. And that's all people have to go off of is what we wrote. So whether our young woman was an older man or whether our white whale was one person or two, that's part of how we obfuscate.
Part of this, what the CIA review board does is they send the book to Falcon House and Falcon House compares it to the cases and says, can somebody identify this? And they came back and said, no. So we have put our faith in the CIA review board that, you know, they have cleared this information as not being classified.
My frivolous question is, and I know it's your business, so I don't want you to like, you know, give away stuff for free. But on the other hand, you know, I've got to ask, just give me a couple of CIA trade secrets that's going to, I don't know, help me manage my children or get a promotion or something.
So I'll tell you one that's really powerful that especially for parents and for spouses, There's something called the perception of power or the perception of decision. In any given situation, the person who is in true power, the position of true power, is the person who makes the final decision. But you can give someone the perception that they have power by giving them two choices. What they don't realize is that the two choices you give them are both choices that get you what you want in the end. So for example, with our son used to never want to brush his teeth, ever, when he was 5, 6, 7 years old. So instead of just saying, go brush your teeth, go brush your teeth, go brush your teeth, we gave him the perception of power. And we said, do you want to brush your teeth in 2 minutes or do you want to brush your teeth in 5 minutes? Him feeling the sense of power to say 5 minutes meant that he at 5 minutes, when the timer went off, went to the bathroom and brushed his teeth, and he felt so good about himself. But at the end of the day, he never had a choice. Right? We gave him the perception that he had a choice, but in fact, he never did. That same process works for employees. It works for bosses. It works for clients. It works for customers. Every time you have a sale, do you want to buy this pair of jeans at 70% off? It's like they're giving you the perception of power. You're going to buy the jeans. They know you're going to buy the jeans. They're just selling them to you now at 70% off to get you to buy them now, not to get you to buy them 2 weeks from now or 6 weeks from now.
When you say that, I mean, it doesn't sound like rocket science, does it? Do you think a lot of what the CIA does and what it teaches is, in a way, kind of just, I don't know, common sense or sales skills or parenting skills that lots of people do anyway? You
mentioned earlier, Roland, how does CIA let me do what we do? How does CIA let me be on camera? And how does it let me talk about what I'm talking about? The truth is, 98% of what CIA does is not classified. It's not classified. It's based on best practices in psychology and human behavior, best practices in logistics and money investments. What CIA does is not original. The 2% of intelligence operations, that's what's classified. Who they're talking to and what secrets they're getting from those people. That's what's classified. In many ways, what shocks me is that no other CIA officer has ever come out and done what I'm doing now before. I don't know why they haven't. CIA taught me so much about how to eat right, how to sleep well, how to exercise well, how to win an argument with my wife, how to, avoid.
They also taught her to win arguments with you. Yes.
So they taught us so many useful things, and all of those things are not classified. And that's all Everyday Spy teaches. It teaches those things that are not classified.
I was actually wondering about that point as well, because it's like there's a proliferation of like vet bros, right? There's all like, I'm going to teach you how the Navy SEALs will make you a better dad, or like, Delta Force taught me how to close a sale and subscribe to my channel and so on. You do seem to be the first kind of intelligence officer in that milieu. And I was going to ask about that. Like, why is that? Because you certainly seem to fit into that, the kind of category I'm talking about, right?
Absolutely. I do a lot of podcast interviews with them. I know exactly what you're talking about. I would say that that's where our success is accidental. We're taught psychological practices. That's the foundation of getting secrets from somebody is psychological first. It's not about shooting guns. It's not about surviving Hell Week in the Navy SEAL training camps. It's not about physical toughness. It's not even about mental toughness. It's about mental smarts. It's about sophisticated thinking. And that's something anybody can do. So when we start sharing how CIA creates the perception of power, or when we start teaching how CIA differentiates between influence and persuasion, these are very simple, elementary skills that can be learned very, very quickly because they have to be. Because a CIA officer, from day one at CIA to deployment, a CIA officer takes about 9 months to build. From walking across the SEAL to hitting the field, it's 9 months. How do you do that? You do that by teaching them very basic, very standard principles that are based on human psychology that work everywhere in the world.
The biggest thing that the CIA gives us that we can impart to other people as well is a perspective shift. It's a full understanding of how human beings work and how connection with human beings work and how you can use that. Mm-hmm. And I think that perspective shift is what people have found so helpful and unique. That, so often I hear people say, oh, you helped me think about this thing in a different way. And that's all they needed.
You've been listening to me, Roland Oliphant, speaking to the former CIA officers Andrew and Jihi Bustamante, the authors of Shadow Cell, which is out on the 9th of September. That's all for today. We'll be back on Monday with our usual updates. Until then, that was Battle Lines. Goodbye.
Battle Lines is an original podcast from The Telegraph, created by David Knowles and hosted by me, Roland Oliphant, and Venetia Rainey. If you appreciated this podcast, please consider following Battle Lines on your preferred podcast app. And if you have a moment, leave a review, as it helps others to find the show. To stay on top of all our news, subscribe to The Telegraph, sign up to our Dispatches newsletter, or listen to our sister podcast, Ukraine the Latest. You can also get in touch directly by emailing battlelines@telegraph.co.uk or contact us on X. You can find our handles in the show notes. The producer is Peter Shevlin, and the executive producer is Louisa Wells.